Jedediah lived in a small cabin nestled deep within the whispering woods. Towering pine trees stood like giant guards, their needles carpeting the forest floor. Every morning, the sun peeked through the branches, painting stripes of gold across his wooden floor. He was a lumberjack, strong and capable, but terribly lonely. His days were filled with the rhythmic swing of his axe, the satisfying thud of wood splitting, and the scent of pine sap. He worked hard, providing lumber for the nearby town, but his evenings were quiet. Too quiet. He'd cook a simple meal of beans and potatoes, read by the light of a flickering oil lamp, and listen to the hooting of owls. Jedediah wasn't always alone. He remembered his mother's warm smile and his father's strong hands. They had passed away many years ago, leaving him the cabin and the lumberjack trade. He missed their laughter, their stories, and the feeling of being part of a family. He longed for a family of his own. He dreamed of a wife, someone to share his life with, someone to fill the cabin with warmth and laughter. He dreamt of children, running through the woods, their small hands clutching wildflowers. Every night, before drifting off to sleep, Jedediah would whisper a silent prayer, asking for a miracle, for someone to share his life with. He didn't need much, just companionship and love. He knew it was a long shot, living so far from town, but he couldn't help but hope. His cabin was small but cozy. He kept it tidy, even though there was no one to impress. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace, waiting for someone to sit in it. A hand-carved cradle, a project he'd started years ago, sat unfinished in the corner, a testament to his unfulfilled dreams. Jedediah was a good man, kind and gentle, despite his rugged appearance. He helped anyone in need, always offering a helping hand or a word of encouragement. He just couldn't seem to shake the feeling of emptiness, the ache in his heart for something more. He often wondered if he was destined to live out his days alone, chopping wood and dreaming of a family that would never be. Far away from Jedediah's quiet woods, in a dusty, struggling farm town, lived Alara. She was as bright and resilient as a wildflower pushing through cracked earth, but life had been relentlessly unkind. Her mother had passed when she was very young, and her father, once a loving and hard-working farmer, had been worn down by years of drought and misfortune. He tried his best, but debts piled up, and desperation clouded his judgment. He made a terrible decision, a choice that shattered Alara's world. He promised her to a man he barely knew, a lumberjack who lived far away and needed help. It was presented as a business arrangement, a way to settle his debts, but Alara knew it was something far more sinister. She was being sold. Alara was scared, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. She didn't want to leave her home, even if it was a struggling farm. She didn't want to marry a stranger, a man she'd never met, but she knew her father was desperate, and she couldn't bear to see him lose everything. She saw the pain in his eyes, the burden he carried, and she felt a strange mix of anger and pity. The day she was to leave dawned gray and bleak, mirroring the storm inside her. Her father packed her few belongings into a worn satchel. A hand-stitched quilt her mother had made, a small wooden doll, and a few simple dresses. He avoided her gaze, his face etched with shame. A gruff man arrived in a rickety wagon, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He barely spoke, offering only a curt nod. Alara climbed into the wagon, her hands trembling. As they pulled away, she looked back at her father, standing alone in the dusty yard. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She knew her life was changing forever. She didn't know what awaited her in the woods with the lumberjack, but she vowed to be strong, to survive, and to find a way to make the best of her terrible situation. Little did she know, she carried a secret, a tiny spark of hope hidden within her, a miracle waiting to be discovered. The journey to Jedediah's cabin was long and arduous. Alara bounced along in the wagon, the rough road jarring her bones. The landscape gradually transformed from dry, cracked fields to dense, green forest. The air grew cooler and smelled of pine and damp earth. When they finally arrived at the cabin, Jedediah was outside, splitting wood. He was even bigger than she had imagined, his shoulders broad and his hands calloused. He stopped chopping as the wagon approached, his brow furrowed in confusion. He hadn't been expecting anyone. The gruff driver grunted, gesturing towards Alara. "She's here." He then tossed a crumpled piece of paper at Jedediah's feet and turned the wagon around, disappearing back down the track as quickly as he had come. Jedediah stared at the retreating wagon, then at Alara, then at the paper. He picked it up, his hands trembling slightly. It was a crude bill of sale, stating that Alara was now in his service in exchange for a sum of money. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This wasn't what he wanted. He looked at Alara again. She stood beside the wagon, small and fragile, her eyes wide with apprehension. He saw the fear in her face, and his heart ached. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted to buy anyone. The very idea was abhorrent to him. He cleared his throat, his voice rough with disuse. "There must be some mistake," he said, his gaze meeting hers. I didn't know anything about this." Alara didn't say anything, but her eyes searched his, trying to gauge his sincerity. She had been expecting a cruel, demanding man, but Jedediah looked genuinely confused and upset. He ran a hand through his thick beard, his mind racing. He couldn't possibly keep her. It wasn't right. But what was he supposed to do? Send her back? He couldn't bear the thought of her returning to that desperate situation. He felt trapped, caught in a situation he hadn't created. His peaceful, solitary life had been shattered in an instant. He looked at Alara again, seeing not a purchased possession, but a scared young woman in need of help. A wave of protectiveness washed over him, surprising him with its intensity. This was going to be more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Jedediah, still reeling from the driver's sudden departure, struggled to find the right words. He felt like he was walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might further upset Alara. He gestured awkwardly towards the cabin. You can come inside," he stammered. "It's not much, but it's shelter." Alara hesitated, then slowly followed him. The cabin was small and sparsely furnished, but it was clean and tidy. She noticed the rocking chair by the fireplace and the unfinished cradle in the corner. They hinted at a life Jedediah had hoped for, a life that seemed impossibly distant now. Jedediah busied himself, trying to appear helpful but only managing to feel clumsy. He stoked the fire, even though it wasn't particularly cold, and offered Alara a cup of water. He couldn't meet her eyes, ashamed of the situation she had been forced into. I don't know what to say," he mumbled, finally breaking the silence. "I swear, I had no idea your father was going to do this. I only agreed to buy some lumber from him. I would never." He trailed off, unable to articulate his revulsion at the thought of owning another person. Alara took a sip of water, her gaze fixed on the floor. "My father was desperate," she said quietly. "He didn't know what else to do." Jedediah sighed. He understood desperation. He knew what it was like to feel trapped and helpless. But that didn't excuse what her father had done. "I won't keep you here against your will," he said firmly. "If you want to go back, I'll find a way to get you back. Promise." Alara looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Where would I go?" she asked softly. "I have nowhere else." Jedediah's heart sank. He knew she was right. She was trapped, just as he was. He couldn't send her back to a life of poverty and desperation, but he couldn't keep her here as a servant either. He had to find a solution, a way to make things right. He sat down heavily in the rocking chair, his head in his hands. He had prayed for a miracle, but this was definitely not the answer he had expected. This was a complicated mess, and he had no idea how to untangle it. He just knew he had to try, for both their sakes. The next few days were filled with an uneasy quiet. Jedediah continued his work as a lumberjack, leaving early in the morning and returning late in the evening. He felt guilty leaving Alara alone in the cabin, but he didn't know what else to do. He needed to provide for them both, even if he wasn't sure what them meant anymore. Alara, in turn, tried to make herself useful. She started by cleaning the cabin, sweeping the floor, and dusting the furniture. She noticed the small details that Jedediah had overlooked, the cobwebs in the corners, the smudges on the windows. She even started to organize his haphazard collection of tools. She was still wary of Jedediah, unsure of his intentions, but she couldn't deny his kindness. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything of her. He always made sure she had enough food and a warm place to sleep. One evening, as Jedediah was returning from work, he saw Alara outside, hanging laundry on a makeshift clothesline. The setting sun cast a golden glow on her face, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of happiness in her eyes. It was the first time he had seen her truly smile. He approached her cautiously. "You didn't have to do that," he said, gesturing towards the laundry. Alara shrugged. "I wanted to," she replied. "It's better than doing nothing." Jedediah smiled back, a genuine smile this time. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate it." As the days passed, a fragile trust began to grow between them. They started to talk more, sharing stories about their lives. Jedediah told Alara about his parents, his love for the woods, and his dreams of having a family. Alara told Jedediah about her life on the farm, her mother's quilts, and her secret love for reading. She still didn't reveal her biggest secret, the one she carried hidden beneath her dress. She was afraid of what Jedediah would think, afraid that he would reject her. But she also knew that she couldn't keep it hidden forever. One day, Alara offered to cook dinner. Jedediah was surprised but grateful. He watched as she expertly chopped vegetables and stirred the stew, her movements graceful and efficient. As they ate together that evening, sharing a simple meal and quiet conversation, Jedediah felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this unlikely arrangement could work. Maybe they could find a way to build a life together, despite the circumstances that had brought them together. But the biggest test was yet to come. One afternoon, the sky turned a menacing shade of gray. The wind howled through the trees, bending them almost double. The air crackled with electricity. Jedediah rushed back to the cabin, knowing a storm was brewing. "Get inside!" he shouted, as he burst through the door. "A big one's coming." Alara quickly gathered the laundry from the line, her heart pounding. They hurried inside, just as the first raindrops began to fall. Soon, the rain was coming down in sheets, battering the cabin walls. Thunder rumbled overhead, and lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in eerie bursts of light. The storm raged for hours, trapping Jedediah and Alara inside. They huddled by the fireplace, watching the wind and rain lash against the windows. The cabin creaked and groaned, as if it might be torn apart at any moment. With nothing else to do, they began to talk. Jedediah shared stories of his childhood, of learning to chop wood from his father, and of his mother's delicious apple pies. Alara, in turn, spoke of her life on the farm, of helping her father plant seeds, and of her dreams of becoming a teacher. She told him about her favorite books, the ones she would sneak away to read in the barn. She told him about her mother's quilt, each patch representing a special memory. She even told him about her fear of thunderstorms, a fear she had always kept hidden. Jedediah listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. He learned about her resilience, her kindness, and her quiet strength. He realized that she was more than just a scared young woman. She was a survivor, a fighter, and a dreamer. As the storm raged outside, their bond deepened inside. They shared their hopes, their fears, and their deepest secrets. They found comfort in each other's presence, a sense of connection they had both been longing for. By the time the storm finally subsided, leaving behind a trail of destruction, Jedediah and Alara were no longer strangers. They were friends, confidants, and something more. They had faced the storm together, and they had emerged stronger, closer, and more connected than ever before. But Alara's secret still lingered between them, a silent barrier waiting to be broken. The day after the storm dawned bright and clear, as if the world had been washed clean. But inside the cabin, the air was thick with unspoken tension. Alara knew she couldn't keep her secret any longer. She had to tell Jedediah the truth. She waited until after supper, when they were both sitting by the fire. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling in her lap. "Jedediah," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." Jedediah looked at her, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Alara? You can tell me anything." Alara closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage. I'm going to have a baby," she blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush. The silence that followed was deafening. Jedediah stared at her, his face blank with shock. He didn't say anything, didn't move a muscle. Alara's heart sank. She had feared this reaction, feared that he would be angry or disgusted. Finally, Jedediah spoke, his voice barely audible. "A baby?" he repeated, as if he couldn't quite comprehend the words. Alara nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm pregnant." Jedediah stood up abruptly and walked over to the window, staring out at the forest. Alara watched him, her stomach churning with anxiety. She couldn't tell what he was thinking, what he was feeling. After what seemed like an eternity, Jedediah turned back to her. His face was still etched with shock, but there was something else there too, something that Alara couldn't quite decipher. He walked over to her and knelt down, taking her hands in his. His grip was firm and reassuring. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "Are you healthy?" Alara nodded, surprised by his reaction. She had expected anger, rejection, but instead he was worried about her well-being. Who is the father?" he asked gently. Alara looked away, ashamed. "It doesn't matter," she said softly. "He's not in the picture." Jedediah squeezed her hands. "It matters to me, Alara," he said. "But what matters more is that you and the baby are safe and cared for." And in that moment, Alara knew that everything had changed. Jedediah's protective instincts had kicked in. He might not have been the father, but he was determined to protect her and her baby. The miracle she carried was about to change both their lives forever. Alara was still reeling from Jedediah's unexpected kindness. She watched him, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He was nothing like the cruel, demanding man she had imagined. Jedediah took a deep breath, his eyes filled with a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. "Alara," he said softly, "I need to tell you something too." He paused, searching for the right words. "For years," he began, "I've been praying for a child. I've always wanted a family, but I never thought it would happen. I thought I was destined to be alone." He gestured towards the unfinished cradle in the corner. "I started building that years ago," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I never finished it because I lost hope. I thought my prayers would never be answered." He looked at Alara, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "And now you're telling me that you're carrying a baby. It's like a miracle." Alara stared at him, her mouth agape. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Jedediah had been praying for a child, and now she, a woman he barely knew, was carrying that child. It was almost too much to comprehend. Jedediah knelt down again, taking her hands in his. "Alara," he said, his voice filled with sincerity, "I promise you, I will protect you and this baby with everything I have. I will be a good father, even if I'm not the baby's real father. I will love this child as if it were my own." He squeezed her hands tightly. "You don't have to worry about anything," he continued. "I will take care of you. I will make sure you have everything you need. You and this baby will be safe here with me." Alara's eyes filled with tears. She had never felt so safe, so cared for, so loved. She had come to this cabin fearing the worst, expecting to be treated as a possession. But instead, she had found a protector, a friend, and maybe even a father for her child. She reached out and touched Jedediah's face, her fingers tracing the lines etched by years of hard work and loneliness. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, Jedediah." And in that moment, they both knew that their lives had been forever changed. They had both been searching for something, longing for something, and they had found it in the most unexpected place. The miracle they had both been praying for had finally arrived. In the days that followed, Alara saw a new side of Jedediah, a side she had never imagined existed. He was no longer just a strong, silent lumberjack. He was a caring, compassionate, and genuinely happy man. He started to take extra care of her, making sure she had plenty of rest and nutritious food. He even started reading to her in the evenings, sharing his favorite stories and poems. He would often place his hand gently on her stomach, as if trying to feel the baby growing inside. Alara watched him, her heart swelling with affection. She saw the genuine joy in his eyes, the pure love that radiated from his being. She realized that he wasn't the cruel man she had feared. He was a good man, a kind man, a man who deserved to be happy. Their bond deepened with each passing day. They talked more, laughed more, and shared more. They were no longer just two strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were friends, partners, and something more. Alara started to feel comfortable in the cabin, as if she finally belonged. She began to personalize the space, adding her own touches to make it feel more like home. She hung her mother's quilt on the wall, adding a splash of color to the otherwise plain room. She even started to help Jedediah finish the cradle, sanding and painting the wood with loving care. Jedediah, in turn, blossomed under Alara's care. He was no longer the lonely, isolated lumberjack. He was a man with a purpose, a man with a family, a man with a future. He started to take pride in his appearance, shaving his beard and wearing clean clothes. He even started to smile more, his eyes crinkling at the corners with happiness. One evening, as they were sitting by the fire, Jedediah reached out and took Alara's hand. He looked at her, his eyes filled with love and gratitude. "Alara," he said softly, "I don't know what I would do without you. You've brought so much joy into my life." Alara smiled back, squeezing his hand. "You've brought so much joy into mine, Jedediah," she replied. "I never thought I could be this happy." And in that moment, they both knew that they had found something special, something rare, something that would last a lifetime. They had found love in the most unexpected place, under the most unlikely circumstances. And their journey was just beginning. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together. The storm that had brought them together had cleared, and a bright new future lay before them. Winter arrived with a vengeance. The snow fell thick and fast, blanketing the forest in a pristine white. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the temperature plummeted below freezing. A blizzard was raging, isolating the cabin from the rest of the world. One morning, Alara woke up with a sharp pain in her stomach. She knew instantly what was happening. The baby was coming. She woke Jedediah, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. "Jedediah," she said, "the baby is coming. It's time." Jedediah jumped out of bed, his heart pounding. He had been preparing for this moment for months, but he still felt a surge of panic. He had never delivered a baby before. He quickly stoked the fire, making sure the cabin was warm. He gathered clean towels and blankets, and he boiled water on the stove. He tried to remain calm, but his hands were trembling. Alara's labor progressed quickly, and soon she was writhing in pain. Jedediah did his best to comfort her, holding her hand and wiping her brow. He remembered the stories his mother had told him about childbirth, and he tried to follow her instructions. The blizzard raged outside, making it impossible to go for help. Jedediah knew he was on his own. He had to deliver this baby, and he had to do it safely. Hours passed, filled with pain, sweat, and tears. Jedediah encouraged Alara, telling her she was strong and brave. He reminded her of their love, of their hopes for the future. Finally, with one last push, the baby arrived. Jedediah caught the tiny infant in his arms, his heart overflowing with joy and relief. It was a girl, small and perfect, with a mop of dark hair and tiny, delicate fingers. He wrapped the baby in a warm blanket and placed her in Alara's arms. Alara looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with love and gratitude. "She's beautiful," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with happiness. Jedediah looked at Alara and the baby, his heart bursting with love. He had never felt so complete, so fulfilled. He had prayed for a child, and his prayers had been answered in the most unexpected way. He named her Hope, a symbol of their new life, a testament to their love, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope for a brighter future. They had faced the blizzard together, and they had emerged stronger, closer, and more deeply in love than ever before. Their family was complete. Hope's arrival transformed Jedediah's life in ways he could never have imagined. He was no longer just a lumberjack, working hard to survive. He was a father, a protector, a provider. His days were now filled with the sweet sounds of a baby's laughter, the warmth of a child's embrace, and the endless wonder of watching Hope grow and learn. He was completely devoted to Alara and Hope, showering them with love and affection. He would spend hours rocking Hope in the cradle he had finally finished, singing her lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice. He would read to Alara in the evenings, sharing his favorite stories and poems, his voice filled with tenderness. He still worked hard as a lumberjack, but now he had a new motivation. He was providing for his family, ensuring that they had everything they needed. He would often bring home small gifts for Alara and Hope, wildflowers he had picked in the forest, smooth stones he had found by the river, or small wooden toys he had carved himself. He learned to change diapers, to feed Hope with a bottle, and to soothe her when she cried. He wasn't afraid of getting his hands dirty, of doing whatever it took to care for his family. Alara watched Jedediah with a heart full of love and gratitude. She had never seen him so happy, so fulfilled. She knew that he was a good father, a loving husband, and a true partner. She also knew that their journey had just begun. They still had challenges to face, obstacles to overcome, but they were ready to face them together. They had found love in the most unexpected place, under the most unlikely circumstances, and their love would only grow stronger with each passing day. The cabin, once a symbol of Jedediah's loneliness, was now filled with warmth, laughter, and love. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place where they could be safe and happy. Jedediah often looked at Alara and Hope, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He had prayed for a miracle, and his prayers had been answered in the most beautiful way. He had found a family, a love, and a purpose. His life was complete. He knew he would spend the rest of his days cherishing Alara and Hope, protecting them, and loving them with all his heart. He was no longer the lonely lumberjack. He was a husband, a father, and a man whose life had been transformed by the power of love. Years passed, and the little cabin in the woods became a haven of love and laughter. Alara and Jedediah built a life together, brick by brick, filled with simple joys and enduring affection. They had started as strangers, brought together by circumstance, but they had become a true family, bound by love, loyalty, and a shared sense of purpose. Hope grew into a bright and curious little girl, with her mother's resilience and her father's kind heart. She loved exploring the woods, collecting wildflowers, and listening to her father's stories. She was the light of their lives, the center of their world. Alara thrived as a mother and a wife. She taught Hope how to read and write, sharing her love of books and knowledge. She helped Jedediah with his work, tending to the garden and mending his clothes. She was the heart of the home, the glue that held their family together. Jedediah continued to work as a lumberjack, providing for his family with unwavering dedication. He was no longer the lonely, isolated man he once was. He was surrounded by love, cherished by his wife and daughter, and fulfilled in his role as a father and husband. He often thought back to the day Alara had arrived at his cabin, the day his life had changed forever. He was grateful for the unexpected turn of events, for the miracle that had brought them together. He knew that he had been given a second chance, a chance to build a life filled with love, happiness, and purpose. One sunny afternoon, as they were sitting on the porch, watching Hope play in the yard, Alara turned to Jedediah, her eyes filled with love. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said softly. Jedediah smiled, taking her hand in his. "We have," he replied. "And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Hope skip through the wildflowers, her laughter echoing through the trees. They had found love and healing in the most unexpected way, and their story was a testament to the power of hope, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring strength of family. Their story concludes not with a grand fanfare, but with the quiet contentment of a family complete, their hearts full, their lives intertwined, forever bound by the miracle that had brought them together in the little cabin in the woods. They had found their belonging, their purpose, and their happily ever after, proving that even the loneliest lumberjack can find love and family in the most surprising of places.